The mediation room at the Halton Region Community Justice Center smelled like recycled air and old carpet. I arrived 12 minutes early, which is what I do when I'm nervous and trying not to show it. I set my canvas tote on the table, pulled out a manila envelope, and sat down in the chair closest to the window. Outside, the November sky over Burlington was the specific gray that means it will not snow, but will threaten to all day. My brother was already there. He had not looked at me when I walked in. He was talking to his lawyer in a low voice, the kind of voice people use when they want to seem casual about something they are not casual about at all. His wife sat beside him, one hand resting on his forearm the way you hold on to something you're worried might slip away. I had not spoken to my brother in 2 years and 4 months. The last real conversation we had was at our grandmother's kitchen table in Hamilton, the night after she told us she was changing her will. He said I had manipulated her. He said I had always been the one she favored and that it wasn't fair and that he had a family to think about. I told him that I hadn't asked for any of it and that maybe he should have called her more than twice a year. He left without finishing his tea. I stayed and helped her wash the dishes, and she said, quietly, while drying a mug she'd had since before my father was born, that some people only show up when there's something to show up for. She died in the spring. Her name was Elspeth. She was 81 years old, and she had lived in the same house on Brent Street for 43 years, and she knew the names of every family on her block, including the ones who had moved in 6 weeks before she passed. She used to send me articles clipped from the Hamilton Spectator with no note attached, just the clipping, which I understood to mean she had thought of me when she read it. She called me every Sunday evening. She never once told me what to do with my life. That is rarer than people think. Her estate was modest by any measure: the house, a savings account, a small collection of furniture that had survived 4 decades without being replaced. Her will divided things plainly. The house and the majority of the savings came to me. My brother received her car, her kitchen appliances, and a set amount she had designated specifically for his children's education accounts. It was not nothing, but it was not what he expected. His lawyer contacted me within a week of the will being read. The letter was professionally worded, which made it easier to understand what it was actually saying. My brother believed the will did not reflect their grandmother's true intentions, and he was prepared to challenge it. I sat with that letter on my kitchen table in Guelph for a long time. Then I called the legal aid line, and then I called the lawyer my grandmother had used to draft the will, a woman named Patricia Hollis, who had a small office above a pharmacy on King Street, and who had been doing estate work in Hamilton for over 30 years. She told me the will was sound, that it had been signed and witnessed properly and recently enough that capacity would be difficult to challenge. She also told me, with the particular patience of someone who has said a version of this many times, that sound wills get challenged all the time. The mediation had been my idea, or rather my concession. I did not want to go to court. I did not want to spend money on litigation or spend months in a process that would hollow out whatever remained between my brother and me. I had suggested mediation through a letter, and he had agreed, which surprised me slightly. I suspect his lawyer told him it would look better if he tried. The mediator's name was Douglas. He was in his 60s, with the careful manner of someone trained to be neutral in rooms where neutrality is not natural. He explained the process. He explained that nothing said today would be binding unless both parties agreed in writing. He looked at each of us as he said it, making sure we understood this was not a courtroom. My brother's lawyer went first. He was thorough. He described my grandmother's later years, the occasional confusion, the reliance on family support, the distance I had maintained while living 3 hours away in Guelph. He described how my brother had driven to Hamilton on weekends, had helped with the roof repair, had been the one who coordinated with her doctor when she had her fall. He described me as someone who had been largely absent. He said the word absent, the way you say a word when you want the weight of it to settle before you continue. Then my brother spoke. He had prepared something. I could tell because he read parts of it from his phone, glancing down at intervals. He talked about how close he and my grandmother had been, about summers he spent at her house as a child, about the fact that he had a daughter and a son who deserved a fair portion of what she left behind. His voice was steady for most of it. Then he looked at me, and his voice shifted. He said I had always been her favorite, that everyone in the family knew it, that I had used that position to influence her decisions. He said the word influence with something behind it that was harder than the word itself. His wife nodded slightly while he spoke. The room was quiet for a moment after he finished. Douglas looked at me and asked if I'd like to respond. I told him I had brought some materials that might be helpful, and I slid the manila envelope across to the clerk Douglas had introduced as his assistant. Inside were printed copies of the email correspondence between my grandmother and me from the past 4 years. Sunday check-ins that had migrated from phone calls to email when her hearing started to decline. There were over 200 of them. They were not dramatic. They were two people talking about weather and recipes and what she had watched on television and what I was working on. There were also records of the e-transfers I had sent her, automatically every month, for the past 3 years. Not large amounts, but consistent. And there was a letter from her family doctor, Dr. Anand, who had been her physician for 11 years and who'd assessed her cognitive function at her annual visit 8 months before she died and found her, in his professional language, fully oriented and capable of independent decision-making. Douglas looked at the documents for a while. He passed the capacity letter to my brother's lawyer, who read it without changing his expression. Then Douglas looked at my brother and asked, quietly, when he had last spoken with their grandmother before her death. My brother said he had seen her at Christmas. Douglas asked if that was this past Christmas. My brother said the one before. Douglas made no visible reaction. He only looked down at the email records and then back up. He said, very calmly, that the picture of my involvement appeared to differ somewhat from what had been described. My brother's lawyer said involvement did not determine the validity of inheritance claims. Douglas agreed. He also noted, without any particular emphasis, that it did become relevant when the argument being made was about the decedent's intentions and state of mind at the time of drafting. My brother was quiet. His wife had stopped nodding. I looked at him and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Something closer to tiredness. Like I had been holding a door closed for a long time and had finally just let it go. He said, and I was surprised he said it directly instead of through his lawyer, that he hadn't known I was doing any of that. The money, the emails. He said I hadn't told anyone. I said that I hadn't thought it required announcement. He looked at the table. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, a mere gesture to what his wife had been doing. I thought about how strange it is, the ways people try to hold each other steady. Douglas called a short break. I went to the hallway and stood by the window that looked out over the parking lot. A woman was loading a stroller into the back of a minivan with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. I watched until she finished and drove away. When we reconvened, my brother's lawyer said his client wished to discuss whether a modified arrangement might be possible, one that acknowledged the educational funds already designated and perhaps provided some additional amount for his children. Douglas looked at me. I said I had thought about this. I said I was not willing to transfer the house because I understood why my grandmother had left it to me, and I intended to take care of it in the way she would have wanted. I said I was willing to increase the education fund amounts to a total that I named, which was meaningful but not what my brother had originally sought. I said I was willing to put this in writing today if he agreed. There was a pause. My brother's lawyer leaned over and spoke to him quietly. My brother looked at me. He said he didn't understand why Grandma hadn't just talked to him about this, about any of it. I said I didn't know the answer to that, but I said that she had talked to me and that for years she had said she worried he only came around when something was needed. I said it as gently as I could. I did not say it to wound him. I said it because he had asked a real question and he deserved a real answer. His wife made a small sound that was not quite a word. My brother put his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. Then he said, "Fine." He said the number was fair and he could live with it. We signed the modified agreement before noon. the house remained mine. The education funds were increased to the amount I had offered. The matter was considered resolved. In the parking lot afterward, my brother and I stood near our respective cars without planning to. The sky had committed to not snowing as promised. His wife was a few steps away, scrolling her phone with the particular concentration of someone giving two people space. He said he didn't know I had still been that close with her. I told him I hadn't gone out of my way to keep it a secret. I had just kept it to myself, the same way you keep most things, when you've learned that sharing them leads to arguments about things other than what you actually shared. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had told his kids Grandma's house would be theirs someday. He said it not as an accusation, but as a confession, that he had promised them something he didn't have to give. I told him that the house on Brant Street had a backyard that Grandma used to let go wild every summer, goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace all the way to the fence, and that his kids were welcome there whenever they wanted to see it. He nodded. He didn't say thank you. But something in his posture changed, the held-in quality that had been there since I walked into that room. And I understood that we were not fixed. We were not the same people we had been before the last 2 years happened. But we were possibly people who could exist in the same space again without the structure of a dispute to hold us apart. I drove back to Guelph in the early afternoon, the highway half empty on a Tuesday, the gray sky following me all the way along the 403. I stopped at a rest station outside of Mississauga and sat in my car with a coffee I had bought from the Tim Hortons inside, and I thought about my grandmother for a while. She used to say that doing the right thing rarely feels righteous in the moment. She said righteous is a feeling that takes time to arrive, and if it comes at all, it usually comes quietly, when you're doing something else and you look up and realize the weight is no longer where it used to be. She was right, I think. She was right about most things. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It waits until the conflict is over, until you are driving alone on a November highway with a coffee going cold in the cup holder, and then it arrives with the specific ache of someone who you cannot call on Sunday evening anymore. I pulled back onto the highway when I was ready and drove the rest of the way home. The house on Brant Street needs work. The eaves straws have to be cleared, and the front porch has a board that flexes when you step on it. And I am told the furnace is original to the last renovation, which was in 1994. There is also a garden along the back fence where my grandmother let things grow however they wanted, and I have decided not to change it. I will clear the deadfall in the spring, but I will let the goldenrod come back on its own. I think she would want that. My brother texted me in December. It was about something small. He wanted to know if I had found the box of her ornaments, because there was a particular one his daughter had always loved, a glass bluebird she used to hang near the top of the tree. I found the box. The bluebird was in it, wrapped in tissue paper the way my grandmother wrapped everything she wanted to keep safe. I mailed it to him with no note, the way she used to send me things. He texted back just 2 words. Thank you. I don't know yet what we are to each other now. I know what we were, and I know what we became in the worst of it, and I know that neither of those is the whole answer. There might be something else still, something that takes longer to name than a Tuesday afternoon can hold. If you have a brother or sister you haven't spoken to in longer than feels comfortable to admit, I want to ask you something honestly. Not what happened and not whose fault it was. Just this. When did you last let them be someone different from the person you decided they were?